Welcome to Her Secret Truth, a place where the truth always comes out. Here you'll hear stories of family betrayals, hidden secrets, and shocking revelations. Every story is a step closer to the truth someone tried to hide. Subscribe to Her Secret Truth so you don't miss new stories you won't be able to stop watching. My son completely lost his temper when I refused to give him the money from selling my farm. His wife even went as far as throwing a trash can through the window of my car, shattering the glass everywhere. Just 20 minutes later, both of them deeply regretted the choices they had made. Before we get into the full story, tell me where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Let me rewind for a moment and explain how a woman who spent 45 years growing corn and raising cattle ended up standing there watching her own family fall apart in spectacular fashion. Believe me, this situation was definitely not part of the retirement plan I had imagined. About 3 weeks ago, I signed the final documents that sold Whitaker Farm to a development company for $850,000. That's not a bad return for land my late husband Samuel and I originally bought for $47,000 back in 1979. What I didn't realize at the time was that my son Nathan had been mentally counting that money as his future inheritance ever since he turned 16. By the time you reach 68 years old, you learn a thing or two about reading people. So when Nathan showed up at my kitchen door last Tuesday with that forced smile and nervous energy, I already had a good idea of what kind of conversation was about to happen. Nathan stepped forward and said that he believed we needed to have a serious talk, attempting to push his way into my kitchen as if he owned the place. In his mind, he probably thought he did, at least until I told him about the sale. I reminded him very clearly that he was 32 years old, and when an adult son wants to visit his mother, he calls ahead and asks if it's a good time. Showing up without warning and demanding a discussion is not how things are done. Nathan is 32 and works in insurance, and he has the kind of soft hands that clearly have never held a plow. His wife Chloe is the type of person who believes farm fresh simply means buying organic groceries at Whole Foods. They live in a massive suburban house with a mortgage so large it could choke a horse, drive matching BMWs, and take vacations in places with names I can barely pronounce. Nathan said the situation was important and asked why he was hearing rumors about me selling the farm. His face was already flushed, which told me exactly where this conversation was going. Apparently Mrs. Patterson had mentioned seeing moving trucks. I poured myself a cup of coffee and took my time. After 45 years of dealing with problems, I had learned that rushing never really solves anything. I calmly explained that I had sold the farm to Highland Development the previous Monday, and that I had received a fair price for it. Chloe immediately jumped in, her voice rising to that sharp pitch that could make dogs howl. She questioned how I could make such a decision without discussing it with family first. According to her, Nathan had deep roots here and this land was supposedly part of his heritage. Hearing that made me shake my head, especially coming from someone who complained about the smell of the farm every time she visited. I looked carefully at my son and noticed Samuel's jawline in his face, but none of the character that had made my husband the man he was. I asked Nathan a simple question. I wanted to know when the last time was that he had actually set foot on this property before that day. He hesitated and insisted that the timing of his visits wasn't really the issue. According to him, they had plans. That immediately caught my attention, so I asked what kind of plans he was talking about. Nathan and Chloe exchanged one of those looks couples give each other when they're silently communicating. Then Nathan pulled out his phone and showed me a spreadsheet. Chloe explained that they had been working with a financial advisor. Suddenly she sounded very professional. She said the farm could have been leveraged for far more money than the price I accepted. According to their plan, they could have developed the land themselves while keeping it within the family. I stared at the spreadsheet, looking at all those rows and columns of numbers that apparently represented my life's work. After 45 years of personally making every financial decision about that property, they believed they could simply walk in with advice from some city financial expert and explain why I had made a mistake. I asked them directly if they had really been planning what to do with my land. Nathan quickly corrected me, saying it was actually our land, or at least it would be eventually. Then he added that at 68 years old I should start thinking about my legacy and about taking care of my family. That was the moment I slowly set down my coffee cup and gave them both the same look that used to make Nathan clean his room without any further argument. I calmly explained that I had been managing the finances of this farm since before he was born. Over the years I survived 3 recessions, 2 droughts, and the long, expensive battle with his father's cancer treatments. After dealing with all of that, I certainly knew how to manage my own money. Nathan's face changed from slightly flushed to completely red. He quickly tried to explain that he hadn't meant it that way. He started talking about their expenses, their responsibilities, the children's future college funds, and the mortgage payment on their house. I told him that sounded like a personal problem. At that point, Chloe jumped up so quickly that her chair tipped over behind her. She angrily called me a selfish old woman and admitted that they had been counting on that money. And there it was, the truth finally out in the open. I stood up as well and let all 68 years of dealing with entitled nonsense show in my voice. I explained that they had been counting chickens that were never going to hatch. That money came from my land I had worked on for my entire adult life. But Nathan still wasn't finished. He insisted that I didn't understand and claimed they had already made commitments based on that money. I finished his sentence and reminded him that the money had never been his in the first place. I explained that what he was describing was simply poor financial planning, and that was not my responsibility. The kitchen suddenly became quiet, with the only sound being the steady ticking of Samuel's old wall clock. Eventually Nathan delivered what he clearly believed was his strongest argument. He said they were not giving up and insisted that the money belonged to the family, promising that somehow they would make sure it stayed in the family. Now, a younger woman might have been intimidated by that threat. But at 68, after 45 years of dealing with everything from loan officers to livestock, I wasn't about to be bullied by my own son. "Nathan," I said, keeping my voice as cold and steady as ice, "you just stood in your mother's kitchen and threatened her over money you never worked a day to earn. I strongly suggest you think very carefully about what you decide to do next." The look in Nathan's eyes the moment he realized I was not going to give in told me everything I needed to know. The boy who once followed me around the farm helping collect eggs was gone. Standing in front of me was someone entirely different. This was a man who had decided that $850,000 mattered more than his relationship with his own mother. He grabbed Chloe by the arm and headed for the door, muttering that we would see how things turned out. A second later, the screen door slammed so hard behind them that the frame rattled. I sat back down at the kitchen table, picked up my coffee again, and started making a quiet mental list. Spending 45 years solving problems on a farm teaches you something important. When someone threatens you, you had better be ready with more than just words. And Nathan had just made the biggest mistake of his life by underestimating his mother. The next morning, the phone rang exactly at 6 o'clock. Of course it was Nathan. Apparently threatening your mother also gives you the motivation to start early with harassment. He began speaking in a tone that sounded carefully controlled, saying that he had spent the night thinking about our conversation from the day before, and perhaps he had come across a little too strongly. I was already fully dressed and drinking coffee. Years of farm life had taught me that problems never solve themselves while you hide under the blankets. "Nathan," I told him plainly, "yesterday you stood in my kitchen and threatened me." He quickly denied making any threats and said he simply believed the matter should be discussed calmly between adults. Then he suggested that we sit down for dinner that evening. Chloe, he added proudly, was planning to cook her famous pot roast. Famous pot roast. The woman struggled to boil water without burning it, but apparently now she was Julia Child. I told him I would pass because I already had plans. That immediately made him curious. He asked what kind of plans I could possibly have. Now that was interesting. Nathan had never cared about my schedule before. I told him I was playing bridge with the girls. Before he could stop himself, he snapped and ordered me to cancel it. The command slipped out so quickly that even he sounded surprised by it. That was the moment something cold settled in my stomach. I asked him to repeat what he had just said. He tried to recover quickly, explaining that this was serious family business and surely a bridge game could wait. I made my position clear. I told him that I would say this once and only once. The farm had been sold, the money belonged to me, and the conversation was finished. He replied that we would see about that and hung up before I could respond, which was probably wise because the words I was about to say would not have been suitable for polite company. By 8 o'clock that morning, my neighbor Frank was standing on my porch. He had a concerned look on his face and a thermos of coffee in his hand. He told me I might want to see something and handed me his tablet. The message had appeared on the community Facebook page about an hour earlier. The post came from Chloe, and it was a masterpiece of manipulation carefully disguised as concern. She wrote that she was worried about her mother-in-law, Eleanor Whitaker. According to her, I had been making very strange financial decisions recently, and the family was deeply concerned about my mental condition. She explained that I had sold the family farm without consulting anyone, and claimed that I had been acting paranoid and hostile whenever they tried to discuss it. Then she asked if anyone knew about senior services or resources for families dealing with elderly relatives who might need help making decisions. She finished by saying they only wanted what was best for me. At that point, the post already had 15 comments. Most of them were from people I had known for decades, offering sympathy and advice about how to deal with difficult elderly relatives. I read every single comment. With each one, my anger grew as more people suggested ways to help poor Eleanor. I turned to Frank and asked him to hand me his phone. He hesitated and asked what exactly I planned to do. I told him I was about to do something I should have done 40 years ago. Stop letting people underestimate me. Using his phone, I typed my reply directly under Chloe's post. I introduced myself and thanked everyone for their concern about my mental state. Then I explained that I was perfectly sharp enough to recognize financial manipulation when it appeared in front of me. I clarified that my son and daughter-in-law were angry because I had sold my farm and refused to give them money to cover their poor financial decisions. I also reminded everyone that I was 68 years old, not 98, and fully capable of managing my own affairs. Finally, I added that anyone who wished to verify my mental competence could contact Dr. Phillips, who had examined me the previous week and confirmed that I was in excellent health. I ended by thanking everyone again for their concern. Before Frank could protest, I posted the message. Then I leaned back in my chair and prepared to watch the fireworks. Within about 10 minutes, the entire tone of the comments section shifted. People I had known for decades started responding. They reminded everyone how capable and sharp I had always been, how I had managed the farm by myself after Samuel passed away, and how absurd it was to suggest that I couldn't handle my own finances. Then my phone rang. It was Dr. Phillips. He told me he had just seen the Facebook drama and wanted to reassure me that if anyone dared question my mental competence, he had thorough documentation confirming my excellent cognitive health. I thanked him and told him I had a strong feeling I might need that documentation sooner rather than later. He asked if there was something else happening that he should know about. As I stood in my kitchen, I looked out the window and noticed a car parked across the street that I didn't recognize. It had been sitting there since the previous day. I told him that my family situation was becoming complicated. After I hung up, Frank slowly shook his head. He said that I had basically declared war on social media. I replied that the war started the moment they publicly questioned my mental state. All I had done was make sure people heard the truth before anyone could twist the story further. Just then my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message said that my son owed $75,000 to some very serious people. It also stated that payment was expected by Friday, or there would be consequences. The sender finished by saying they thought I should know and signed it as a concerned friend. I showed the message to Frank, and his face immediately turned pale. He said grimly that it sounded like gambling debts, which explained Nathan's desperation. $75,000. I couldn't say I was shocked. Nathan had never been responsible with money, but the amount itself was staggering. Frank quietly reminded me that people had been killed over much less money than that. I finished his thought by saying that if Nathan really owed money to loan sharks, then my son had just become a very dangerous man. Then I asked Frank for a favor. He told me to name it. I explained that I needed him to be my witness for whatever might happen next. Because by 68 years old I had learned something important. When your own family turns against you, you had better have friends who are ready to stand beside you. And something in my gut told me I would need every ally I could get. By 10 o'clock that morning, I found out just how far they were willing to go. That was when Chloe showed up at my front door with a social worker. The woman introduced herself politely as Linda Harper from Adult Protective Services. She explained that her office had received a report expressing concern about my well-being. Linda looked like she would rather be anywhere else in the world, which told me she had probably already figured out that this was a family dispute disguised as a welfare check. I stepped out onto the porch, keeping my voice calm while watching Chloe carefully. 45 years of dealing with people trying to take advantage of me had taught me exactly how to handle situations like this. I asked what kind of concerns had been reported. Linda explained that my daughter-in-law had contacted their office because she believed I might be experiencing cognitive problems and making impulsive financial decisions. Behind her, Chloe stood with an expression of exaggerated concern that might have won an Oscar if manipulation paid as well as acting. I calmly pointed out that this entire visit was based on a phone call from someone who saw me maybe 6 times a year. Linda shifted slightly and admitted that she was required to follow up on all reports, but she also said honestly that I seemed perfectly lucid. I replied that of course I was lucid. I added that refusing to hand over my life savings to cover someone else's gambling debts did not qualify as mental instability. Chloe's face immediately turned pale. She quickly insisted she had no idea what I was talking about. I took out my phone and showed Linda the text message. Then I asked Chloe whether the number $75,000 sounded familiar, because I had received a very interesting message that morning about Nathan's debts. Linda looked between us as though she were watching a tennis match. She asked if she could run through a few standard questions as part of a basic competency check. For the next 10 minutes she asked simple questions. She asked what year it was, who the president was, and whether I could count backward from 100 by sevens. For someone who had balanced farm accounts for 45 years, it was child's play. When she finished, Linda stated clearly that I was in full possession of my mental faculties. She explained that her report would note that this appeared to be a family financial dispute, rather than any issue with competency. At that point Chloe's carefully practiced expression finally collapsed. She complained loudly that the situation was ridiculous, and insisted I was being manipulated by fortune hunters. According to her, the farm should have stayed in the family. Linda responded patiently that I had every legal right to sell my property and manage my finances however I wished unless a court declared me incompetent. She also made it clear that no one else had any legal claim to my assets. After they left, I didn't sit around feeling sorry for myself. Instead, I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, Diane Fletcher. Diane had been handling legal matters for our family ever since Samuel and I bought the farm, and she had absolutely no patience for nonsense. After listening to everything that had happened that morning, she told me we needed to meet that afternoon and that I should bring any documentation related to threats or harassment. 2 hours later, I was sitting in Diane's office with a folder full of evidence. Screenshots of Chloe's Facebook post, the text message about Nathan's gambling debts, and photographs of the car that had been parked outside my house watching me. "They're following a very familiar playbook," Diane said as she opened a thick folder on her desk. "I've seen this strategy many times before. First they create a pattern of concern. That includes the Facebook post, the call to your doctor, and the visit from Adult Protective Services. After that, the next step is usually finding witnesses who will claim you've been behaving erratically." I asked what kind of witnesses she meant. Diane explained that they could be almost anyone willing to say they had seen something unusual. It could be a store clerk who remembered me seeming confused, a neighbor claiming I had acted strangely, or anyone else who might support their story. I pointed out that I hadn't behaved strangely at all. She nodded and said that unfortunately it didn't really matter. People's memories are unreliable, and sometimes they can be persuaded that they witnessed things that never actually happened, especially if they believe they are helping a worried family member. Diane pulled another document from the folder. She told me she was going to recommend something that might sound extreme but believed it was necessary given the situation. I told her I was listening. She suggested I undergo a full psychological evaluation. She made it clear she did not believe I needed it, but having solid, unquestionable documentation of my mental competency would prevent Nathan from muddying the waters any further. I asked how long the process would take. She told me that Dr. Emily Lynn could see me the following day. Dr. Lynn specialized in competency evaluations, and her reports held strong weight in court. I told Diane to schedule it immediately. Then I asked her to begin documenting everything. Every threat, every attempt to manipulate the situation, every lie Nathan and Chloe told. I explained that when this eventually reached court, and I was certain it would, I wanted to be fully prepared. Diane gave me a serious look and reminded me of something important. If Nathan truly owed money to dangerous people, The situation could escalate beyond legal maneuvering. I told her that only meant I needed to be ready for whatever might come next. That evening I sat on my front porch with Samuel's old shotgun resting across my lap. I had not done that in about 5 years, not since coyotes had started sneaking into the chicken coop. The irony was not lost on me. Instead of protecting the farm from wild animals, I was now protecting myself from my own family. My phone buzzed with another message from Nathan. He wrote that we needed to talk and that things had gotten out of hand. He asked if he could come over. I stared at the message for a long time before finally replying. I told him no and made it clear that any further communication would go through my lawyer. The answer came back immediately. He warned me that I was making a big mistake. I looked out over the land that used to be my farmland. Survey stakes were already planted in the ground, and signs announcing the future Highland Meadows development stood where corn had once grown. I smiled grimly. "No, Nathan," I said quietly to the empty night. "The mistake was yours when you decided to threaten your mother." Because at 68, I had learned that sometimes the best defense is a strong offense, and I was preparing to go on the attack. The psychological evaluation confirmed exactly what I already knew. I was sharp as a tack and twice as stubborn. Dr. Lynn's report read almost like praise. It stated that the patient demonstrated excellent cognitive functioning, clear reasoning ability, and sound judgment across all areas evaluated. Diane reviewed the results in her office on Friday morning and warned me that Nathan would not be happy about them. I told her that at my age I had stopped worrying about disappointing Nathan. What mattered to me was protecting myself from whatever he might try next. That was when Diane slid a manila envelope across her desk. She explained that it had arrived by messenger about an hour earlier. Inside was a petition for guardianship filed by Nathan Whitaker. In the document, he asked the court to declare his mother, Eleanor Whitaker, mentally incompetent and to appoint him as her legal guardian, giving him full control over her finances and medical decisions. The petition described a woman supposedly experiencing rapid mental decline. It claimed I had been making impulsive financial decisions without consulting family members, showing paranoid behavior, and displaying confusion and memory problems. It went on to request immediate court intervention to protect me from further exploitation and to ensure my assets were managed properly for my supposed care and well-being. I read the entire document twice, and with every line my anger grew stronger. Diane pointed out that the hearing had already been scheduled for the following Friday. They had requested an emergency review to speed the process along. I asked if that was even allowed. She told me that unfortunately it was. Then she added that there was something else. Nathan had also requested a temporary restraining order preventing me from making any financial transactions larger than $5,000 until the competency hearing took place. I carefully placed the papers back on the desk, resisting the urge to crumple them. They were trying to freeze my money. Diane explained that the goal was to trap me. If I had limited access to funds, it would become harder for me to fight them legally. She admitted that the strategy was actually quite clever. I corrected her and said it was cleverly diabolical. Leaning back in my chair, I thought through the entire situation. Then I told Diane that Nathan had made one critical mistake. She asked what that was. I explained that he assumed I would fight this defensively. In reality, I had been thinking about offense ever since the day he threatened me. Diane raised an eyebrow and asked what I meant. I told her that I had been documenting everything. Every threat, every lie, and every attempt to manipulate the situation. I had also been gathering evidence about Nathan's real motivation, his gambling debts. Then I pulled out my own folder, which had grown much thicker since I started. I told Diane that Isabella Navarro had been doing some investigating for me. Nathan did not just owe $75,000 to loan sharks. According to Isabella's findings, he was in debt to at least 3 different gambling operations. On top of that, he had maxed out credit cards and a mortgage that was underwater. Diane asked how much everything totaled. I told her the combined amount was close to $200,000. I explained that Nathan and Chloe were financially desperate. This was not just greed anymore. It had become a matter of survival for them. Diane said that desperation could make people either more dangerous or more predictable. I spread several photographs across her desk. Isabella had obtained images of Nathan inside different gambling establishments, along with documents showing his credit history and records of missed mortgage payments. I told Diane that desperate people tend to make mistakes. She studied the evidence carefully and admitted that the material was strong. Then she added that while it was good evidence, we would still need more than proof of Nathan's financial troubles. We need proof that he's actively trying to manipulate the system, Diane explained. I'm already working on that, I replied. I pulled out my phone and opened a recording app. I told her that every conversation since this mess started had been recorded. Nathan threatening me, Chloe's fake concern, even the message from the loan shark. Everything was documented. Diane looked at me with mild surprise and said it seemed I had been very busy. I reminded her that 45 years of solving problems on a farm teaches you something important. When someone comes after what belongs to you, defending yourself isn't always enough. Sometimes you have to attack. We spent the next hour reviewing possible witnesses and additional evidence. Nathan had clearly been preparing. There were statements from store clerks who supposedly remembered me acting confused. Some neighbors claimed I had been asking strange questions about the value of my property. They had even lined up someone presented as an expert witness who specialized in elder financial abuse. As I was preparing to leave, Diane mentioned one more thing. Earlier that morning she had spoken with a private investigator who had been hired to conduct surveillance on me the previous week. I asked what kind of surveillance she meant. She explained that the investigator had been following me, documenting my activities and taking photographs. Apparently he had not realized the situation at first, but when he figured out that it involved family members spying on each other, he became uncomfortable. I asked if he had revealed who hired him. Diane said the investigator told her a woman named Chloe Whitaker had paid him in cash, claiming she was worried about her mother-in-law's safety. So they had been watching me. They had been tracking my movements and documenting everything I did. My trip to the bank, my visit to Diane's office, even my appointment with Dr. Lin. They were slowly building a case piece by piece. But they had made one very important mistake. They had hired someone who still had a conscience. I told Diane that I wanted to hire that investigator myself and turn the tables on them. She asked if I was certain that was wise. I told her that by 68 years old, wisdom meant knowing exactly when to stop playing defense and start playing offense. I drove home feeling a sense of purpose I had not experienced since Samuel died. For 3 years I had mostly been drifting through life, going through the motions. But Nathan's betrayal had awakened something inside me. The woman who had built that farm from nothing was still there. The woman who had survived every challenge life threw her way had not disappeared. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed the same black sedan parked across the street again. This time I did not feel intimidated. Instead, I felt energized. Let them watch. Let them document everything. Let them underestimate the 68-year-old woman who was about to teach them that threatening their mother had been the biggest mistake of their lives. Because the fight had only just begun, and I had every intention of winning it. Later that afternoon I discovered something that could have easily pushed someone else into panic. My back door was standing open, and muddy footprints tracked straight through my kitchen. But I did not call the police. Instead, I did something that would have made Samuel proud. I got creative. On the kitchen table, someone had arranged several photographs in a neat line. The pictures showed me entering the bank, walking into Diane's office, and speaking with Dr. Lin. Beneath the photographs was a handwritten note. The message told me to stop fighting and claimed that I was going to lose anyway. It warned that continuing this battle would only make things harder for everyone. It ended with a final line telling me to be smart for once in my life. At the bottom was Nathan's name. By 68 years old I had learned that some people confuse kindness with weakness. Nathan had apparently forgotten that the woman who raised him was the same woman who kept a farm running through 3 recessions and 2 droughts. Instead of calling the police, I contacted a security company and had a top-level system installed that very same day. Not the basic package Nathan might have expected. I chose a system with motion sensors, night vision cameras, and remote monitoring that automatically uploaded every recording to the cloud. The installer mentioned that the equipment was unusually advanced for a private home, and asked if I was expecting trouble. I told him that I simply wanted to make sure any future visitors were properly documented. While the cameras were being installed, I drove to visit an old friend of mine, Isabella Navarro. Isabella runs the most efficient information network in 3 counties. Isabella knows everything about everyone, And more importantly, she never forgets it. When I walked in, she greeted me with a knowing smile and poured a cup of coffee without even asking. She told me she had been wondering when I would stop by and mentioned she had already heard about my family troubles. I told her it was nothing I couldn't handle, but I needed a favor and was willing to pay for it. She told me to name it. I explained that I needed every piece of information she could find about Nathan and Chloe's finances, their debts, their spending habits, and anyone they might owe money to, and I needed it quickly. Isabella's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. She told me I had definitely come to the right person and promised results within 48 hours. On Sunday evening, she called me with a report that went far beyond what I expected. She told me that Nathan and Chloe were in serious trouble. Nathan had gambling debts scattered all over the state, and Chloe had been running up credit cards without any restraint. I asked how much money we were talking about. Isabella estimated the total debt at roughly $200,000. She explained that the house was mortgaged to the limit, both cars were financed, and at least 6 credit cards were completely maxed out. $200,000. Even though I had been expecting bad news, that number still hit hard. Isabella added that Nathan had also been borrowing from some very unpleasant people, the kind who do not send friendly reminders when payments are late. That explained the urgency behind everything. They were not just greedy, they were desperate. Monday morning brought another surprise. At 7 o'clock, Diane called with news that changed everything. She told me I needed to come to her office immediately, because someone had tried to break in during the night. When I arrived, I found Diane standing in her office with a police officer and several scattered files. She explained that whoever broke in had specifically been looking for my case file. They had not taken anything, but they had photographed several documents, likely hoping to find something they could use against me in court. I asked if they had found anything useful. Diane said that was the strange part. Whoever did it clearly was not very bright. They had photographed Dr. Lynn's evaluation and my medical records, the very documents that proved I was completely competent. The police officer, a young man named Thompson, looked up from his notebook and asked if I had any idea who might be responsible. Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was Nathan. He said he thought we should meet because the legal situation was getting out of hand. I looked at Officer Thompson, who nodded slightly and silently encouraged me to keep Nathan talking. I asked Nathan why he suddenly felt that way. He said that family members should not be fighting each other in court and suggested we might be able to reach some kind of arrangement. I asked him what kind of arrangement he had in mind. He hesitated before replying that maybe I did not actually need all that money. Nathan continued as if his idea made perfect sense. He said he could not understand what I planned to do with $800,000 anyway. According to him, I could simply give him and Chloe enough money to clear their debts, and then everyone would be satisfied. I asked him how much money he believed that would be. He replied casually that something around $300,000 should be enough. In his mind, that amount would pay off everything they owed and still leave me plenty for retirement. $300,000. More than enough to wipe away their debts and leave them comfortable. And Nathan spoke about it as though he were doing me a favor. I asked him what would happen if I refused. There was a pause before he answered. Then he said that I really did not want to go to court because certain things might come out that could be embarrassing for everyone involved. I asked what kind of things he meant. Nathan said that people might begin asking questions about his father's death, and how convenient it had been that Samuel passed away just before the value of the farm started rising dramatically. The implication struck me like a physical blow. My own son was threatening to suggest that I had somehow been involved in Samuel's death from cancer 3 years earlier. Officer Thompson was writing notes rapidly. I asked Nathan directly if he was threatening me. He insisted he was not threatening anyone. He claimed he was only pointing out that competency hearings often bring up family history, and sometimes those details can appear suspicious to people who do not know the real story. I told him I understood. Then I asked where he wanted this meeting to take place. He suggested the old barn on the property at 8 o'clock that evening. According to him, it would be quiet and private, a place where we could talk without interruptions. After I ended the call, Officer Thompson looked concerned. He said the conversation sounded like a clear threat, and the location Nathan suggested worried him even more. The barn was isolated and there would be no witnesses. Diane agreed and said I absolutely should not meet Nathan alone. But I had already started thinking of a better plan. With those new security cameras installed and 45 years of dealing with problems face to face, I told them I had an idea. That evening at 8 o'clock, Nathan arrived at my house expecting to find a frightened and confused old woman ready to surrender to his demands. Instead, he found someone who had spent 45 years handling problems and had no intention of backing down to a spoiled man with gambling debts. Even if that spoiled man happened to be her son. Nathan walked into my kitchen like he owned the place. Apparently that belief had not changed despite everything that had happened. What he did not realize was that every word he was about to say was being recorded in high definition. He said he was glad I had finally decided to be reasonable. I told him to sit down so we could talk. I gestured toward the kitchen table, carefully positioning myself so the cameras had a clear view. He sat at the same table where I had served him breakfast every school morning for 18 years. The irony was not lost on me. The place where our relationship had once grown was about to become the place where it ended. Nathan began confidently, pulling out a folder as if he believed he held every advantage. He explained that he already had the guardianship papers ready to file, but said we could avoid that if I chose to be sensible. I asked him what he meant by sensible. He explained that I could sign power of attorney over to him and give him full access to the farm money. In return, he would drop the competency case and we could go back to being a normal family. I looked carefully at my son. I searched his face for some sign of the boy who once brought me dandelions and proudly called them flowers. All I saw was a stranger wearing his face. I asked what would happen if I refused. His expression hardened immediately. He said that if I refused, we would go to court and I would lose. According to him, he had witnesses prepared to testify about my supposed erratic behavior. Store clerks would say I had seemed confused, and neighbors would claim I had been acting paranoid. I told him those would be lying witnesses. Nathan shrugged without shame and replied that people remember what they need to remember, especially when they believe they are helping a concerned family member protect his elderly mother. I asked if he had paid them. He answered calmly that he had simply motivated them to do the right thing. Then he explained that I could not win this fight. Even if I somehow convinced the judge that I was competent, he would continue filing petitions again and again. Every 6 months or every year he would drag me back into court and make my life miserable until I finally gave him what he wanted. By 68 years old, I had learned to control my temper. But Nathan was pushing limits I had almost forgotten existed. I asked him exactly what he wanted. He answered immediately. He said he wanted what belonged to him, what should have been his all along. I reminded him that his father and I had worked every day for 45 years to build that farm, while he had never spent a single day working that land. Nathan said he should not have to work for it because he was family. In his mind, that money belonged to the family. I corrected him. That money belonged to me. His face turned red with anger. He shouted that I was a selfish old woman who would rather watch her own son be destroyed than share money I would never be able to spend anyway. I told him I would rather see my son learn to stand on his own feet instead of gambling away money he had never earned. Nathan jumped up so quickly that his chair crashed backward onto the floor. He said that was fine and that we would handle things the hard way. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. He told Chloe that I was still refusing to cooperate, and instructed her to activate something he called Plan B. The words immediately caught my attention. Plan B did not sound good. I asked him what Plan B meant. He gave me a cold smile, the most chilling expression I had ever seen on my child's face. He said I would find out soon enough. After Nathan left, I remained in my kitchen and reviewed the recording. Every threat, every admission about bribing witnesses, and every promise to make my life miserable had been captured clearly. At 10:30 that night my phone rang. It was Chloe. She said she wanted me to know that Nathan and she were very disappointed with the decision I had made that evening. I told her I was sure they were. She continued by saying they had truly hoped the matter could be settled quietly within the family. But since I had chosen to be difficult, they would now have to take other measures. I asked her what kind of measures she was talking about. Chloe answered calmly that beginning the next day, they would start sharing some very interesting information with my friends and neighbors. According to her, people would soon hear stories about my supposed mental instability, the questionable circumstances surrounding Samuel's death, and even rumors that I had been hiding assets from the family. I told her those accusations were lies. She replied that maybe they were, but in a small town people talk. Once rumors begin spreading, they tend to take on a life of their own. The message was clear. They intended to destroy my reputation, turn my friends and neighbors against me, and make me an outcast in the community where I had lived for 45 years. But Chloe was not finished. She added that they had also been speaking with some very interesting people who had a financial interest in Nathan's well-being. My blood ran cold. She was talking about the loan sharks. She said those people were very concerned about Nathan's ability to repay his debts, but they were also very understanding when it came to family obligations. Sometimes, she explained, elderly parents simply need a little encouragement to help their children. I asked if she was threatening to have me harmed. Chloe quickly said she was not threatening anything. She simply wanted me to know that Nathan's creditors were aware of his family situation, and that they were very creative when it came to collecting debts. After she hung up, I did not sit there feeling sorry for myself. By 68 years old, I had learned that self-pity was a luxury I could not afford. Instead, I called Diane. She answered groggily and asked if I realized what time it was. I told her I needed something done first thing the following morning. I wanted her to establish a trust. She asked what kind of trust one had in mind. I told her it needed to be the kind that placed every single dollar from the farm sale permanently beyond Nathan's reach, no matter what happened to me. There was a short pause. Diane asked if I was all right. She said my voice sounded different. I explained that I was not scared. I was angry. And when I become angry, I tend to get very creative when it comes to solving problems. She asked what kind of creativity I meant. I told her it would be the kind that taught my son that threatening his mother had been the biggest mistake of his life. Nathan and Chloe had made one critical mistake. They believed I was just a helpless old woman who would crumble under pressure. They clearly did not know me very well. By Tuesday morning, I discovered just how serious they were about carrying out their threats. By 8 o'clock, half the town had already heard stories about my supposed mental decline. Frank knocked on my door before I had even finished my first cup of coffee. He told me there was some nasty gossip spreading around town and said I deserved to know what people were saying. I told him to let me guess. I suggested the rumors probably claimed I was going senile, hiding money from my poor devoted son, and perhaps even responsible for my husband's death in order to collect insurance money. Frank's expression confirmed I had guessed correctly. He asked how I had known. I explained that I knew exactly who was spreading those stories and why. My phone had been ringing since 6 that morning. Old friends were calling with polite curiosity, wanting to hear my side of things. Neighbors were offering help with difficult family situations. The church secretary even called to ask if I needed assistance managing my finances. Every conversation felt like a careful dance. People pretended to offer support while quietly fishing for information. In a small town, gossip spreads faster than wildfire and burns twice as hot. But by 68 years old, I had learned that sometimes the best defense is a strong offense. So I called Isabella Navarro. I asked her if she remembered the investigation she had done for me. She said of course she did. Then I told her that now I needed her to start sharing what she had discovered. Isabella asked if I was certain about that. Once information like that spreads, she warned, it can never be taken back. I told her I was sure. People deserve to know the truth about Nathan and Chloe's financial situation before they started feeling too sorry for them. Isabella went to work with the efficiency of a military operation. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, word had begun circulating around town about Nathan's gambling debts, Chloe's maxed-out credit cards, and their desperate attempt to take their elderly mother's money. Public opinion started shifting faster than I expected. At 4 o'clock, Dr. Phillips called me. He said he had several disturbing conversations that day. A number of people had asked him about my mental condition and whether I was capable of managing my own affairs. I asked him what he had told them. He replied that he had simply told the truth, that I was in excellent health and mentally sharp as ever. But he also admitted he was concerned about the reason behind those questions. I told him it was nothing more complicated than family greed. That evening Nathan called again. This time I could hear the panic in his voice. Nathan's voice came through the phone, tense and angry. He said that people around town were spreading terrible rumors about him and Chloe. According to him, lies about their finances and gambling debts were circulating everywhere, and he demanded that I make it stop. I calmly told him that I had no control over what people chose to say. He immediately blamed me, insisting I was the one responsible for those rumors. I corrected him. I explained that I was not spreading rumors. I had simply stopped covering up his mistakes. He accused me of destroying their reputation. I told him the truth. I said he had destroyed his own reputation the moment he threatened his mother for money. Then I reminded him what family is supposed to mean. Family does not break into each other's homes. Family does not hire private investigators to spy on one another. And family certainly does not threaten to have loan sharks harm their own mother. For a moment there was nothing but silence. When Nathan finally spoke again, his voice had changed. It sounded cold and calculating. He told me that if I wanted to play hardball, then the game was on. Then he hung up. At that moment I knew the real war was about to begin. Wednesday morning brought the first direct attack. When I stepped outside, I discovered my car tires had been slashed. Across my garage door someone had spray painted the word thief. Frank arrived just as I was scrubbing the paint away. He looked at the damage and said the situation had gone too far. He insisted I should call the police. I told him I already had. I held up my phone and explained that Officer Thompson was already on his way. I also told Frank something else. My security cameras had recorded everything. Before he could respond, a black pickup truck pulled into my driveway. 2 men stepped out. They were large, intimidating men who clearly had not come for a friendly visit. The larger one called out that they needed to have a conversation. Frank immediately stepped in front of me, but I gently placed my hand on his arm. 45 years of dealing with difficult people had taught me that showing fear only encourages them. I told the men they were standing on private property and asked them to state their business or leave. One of them replied that it was a private family matter. Nathan Whitaker owed them money, and they understood his mother had the means to help him resolve that problem. I said firmly that I knew nothing about my son's debts, and that I was not responsible for paying them. The second man smiled in a way that made it clear he enjoyed intimidation. He said that family is family, and sometimes elderly parents need help understanding their obligations. I asked directly if he was threatening me. He responded that they were simply explaining the situation. According to him, Nathan owed $75,000 and the interest was growing every day. He added that surely a loving mother would not want to see her son harmed over money she could easily afford to pay. Frank had already pulled out his phone. He announced he was calling the police. The first man calmly told him to go ahead, saying they were only having a conversation. What those men did not know was that my security system had recorded the entire exchange, and Officer Thompson was already on his way. After they left, I sat on my porch and waited for the police. I did not feel like a victim. Instead, I felt energized. Nathan had now escalated things to the point of sending criminals to threaten me. That meant he was becoming desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. When Officer Thompson arrived, I showed him the video of the encounter along with the recordings of Nathan's threats from the previous night. He said the evidence was serious enough to support criminal intimidation charges, and told me they could arrest my son immediately. But I told him not yet. I said I wanted to see how far Nathan was willing to go. By 68 years old, I had learned something important. Sometimes the best strategy is to let your enemy dig their own grave. And Nathan was doing a beautiful job with the shovel. Thursday morning, I walked into the courtroom wearing my best Sunday suit and carrying a briefcase filled with enough evidence to destroy Nathan and Chloe's case completely. Judge Harrison presided over the hearing. He was known as a fair man who had handled disputes in our county for 20 years. What he disliked most was having his time wasted, especially by family members trying to manipulate the legal system. Nathan and Chloe were seated at the plaintiff's table with their attorney. Their lawyer was a polished man from the city who probably charged more per hour than many people earned in a week. They looked confident, almost smug. They should not have. Diane leaned toward me and quietly asked if I was certain about the strategy we were using because it carried some risks. I reminded her that I had been taking risks my entire life. Samuel and I had risked everything when we bought that farm. Later I risked everything again when I had to run it alone after he died. This was simply another risk. Nathan's attorney, a man named Ashford, stood up to present their case. He described me as a woman suffering from rapid mental decline, someone making impulsive financial decisions and displaying paranoid behavior. According to him, I desperately needed protection from my own poor judgment. He presented witness after witness. Store clerks testified that I had seemed confused. Neighbors claimed I had been acting strangely. There was even a handwriting expert who argued that my signature on the farm sale documents showed signs of cognitive impairment. It was an impressive performance. Every piece of it was built on lies and paid testimony, but it was impressive nonetheless. Then it was our turn. Diane stood up with a calm confidence that immediately made Nathan's smug expression falter. She addressed the judge and explained that the petitioners had constructed an elaborate fiction meant to hide their true motive: gaining control of Eleanor Whitaker's money in order to cover Nathan Whitaker's substantial gambling debts. Nathan's lawyer, Ashford, immediately objected. He argued that Nathan's personal finances had nothing to do with the question of his mother's mental competency. Diane responded smoothly that those finances were, in fact, the entire motivation behind the frivolous petition. Judge Harrison leaned forward slightly and said he would allow it. What happened next was something worth watching. Diane dismantled Nathan's case piece by piece. Under oath, the store clerks admitted they had been paid to testify. The neighbors confessed they had never actually seen me behave strangely at all. Nathan had simply told them what to say. The supposed handwriting expert turned out to be a fraud, who had already been disciplined by professional associations in 3 different states. But the real shock came when Diane called her final witness. She announced that Detective Edward Langley would be taking the stand. Nathan's face instantly turned pale. Chloe made a small choking sound beside him. Detective Langley was sworn in and then began his testimony, looking directly at Nathan as he spoke. He informed the court that Nathan Whitaker was currently under investigation for check fraud, identity theft, and extortion. 3 weeks earlier, Nathan had attempted to forge his mother's signature on banking documents in order to gain access to her accounts. The courtroom exploded with noise. Ashford jumped to his feet with objections. Nathan began whispering frantically to Chloe. Judge Harrison had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. When the room finally quieted, Detective Langley continued. He explained that Nathan had hired known criminals to threaten and intimidate his own mother. Just the previous day he had directed loan sharks to her home in an attempt to collect money she did not legally owe anyone. Nathan suddenly jumped to his feet, shouting that the accusations were outrageous. He claimed I was lying and manipulating everyone. Judge Harrison immediately ordered him to sit down and remain silent or risk being removed from the courtroom. But Nathan had already lost control. He began shouting that I was the one who had lost my mind. He accused me of paranoia, hiding money, and turning everyone against him. Chloe tried desperately to pull him back into his seat, whispering for him to stop. Nathan shoved her away and continued yelling. He declared that he was tired of the entire situation and insisted that the money belonged to him. According to him, he deserved it because he was my son. Judge Harrison's expression turned ice cold. He asked Nathan directly if he was admitting that the guardianship petition had been filed because he wanted control of his mother's finances. Nathan's lawyer tried frantically to stop him from speaking, but Nathan no longer cared about legal strategy. He said yes. He complained that I had sold their farm without consulting the family and accused me of being selfish and vindictive. According to him, I was willing to ruin their lives simply out of spite. Chloe begged him to stop talking. Nathan ignored her. He insisted that the money should be helping family members instead of sitting in a bank account for a woman who, in his cruel words, would die alone anyway. The entire courtroom fell silent. Even Judge Harrison looked shocked by the bitterness in Nathan's voice. Diane calmly addressed the judge and remarked that Nathan had just demonstrated the true nature of the petition better than any witness could have done. Judge Harrison nodded grimly. What happened next took less than 3 minutes. He dismissed the competency petition entirely. He ordered Nathan to cease all harassment of his mother, and he referred the matter to the district attorney for possible criminal charges. As Nathan and Chloe were escorted out of the courtroom by the bailiffs, Nathan shouting angrily after being held in contempt of court, I felt something I had not felt for weeks. Peace. The fight was over. I had won. But the real victory was not simply keeping my money or defeating their legal scheme. The real victory was realizing that at 68 years old, I was stronger than I had ever imagined. 3 days after the court hearing, I was sitting on my front porch enjoying my morning coffee when Frank walked over carrying the local newspaper. He suggested I take a look at the front page. The headline read, "Local Family's Greed Exposed in Court." Below it was a detailed report describing Nathan's outburst in court and the criminal charges he was now facing. The article did not hold back. It explained Nathan's gambling debts, the forged documents, the paid witnesses, and the attempt to have his own mother declared mentally incompetent in order to steal her money. The reporter had clearly done thorough research. I folded the newspaper and commented that it seemed the question of whose reputation would be damaged had now been settled. My phone had been ringing constantly all morning. Old friends were calling to apologize for doubting me. Neighbors were offering support. Even the pastor had called, hoping to talk about forgiveness and the importance of family reconciliation. That conversation with the pastor had been particularly interesting. Pastor Williams had told me he understood that I was hurt, but reminded me that Nathan was still my son. According to him, faith teaches us to forgive those who wrong us. I explained that I had already forgiven Nathan for being greedy, selfish, and foolish. But forgiveness did not mean forgetting that he tried to steal from me, threatened me, and even sent criminals to my house. Forgiveness does not mean stupidity. Meanwhile, the criminal case against Nathan moved forward quickly. Detective Langley gathered enough evidence to charge him with attempted fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. Chloe was also facing charges as an accomplice. Their house had been seized as part of the investigation, both of their cars had been repossessed, and Nathan's gambling creditors were circling like vultures. The loan sharks who had shown up at my house were arrested, and they turned out to be surprisingly cooperative about Nathan's role in sending them there. Later that afternoon, Isabella Navarro stopped by with updates from her extensive network of local information. She told me that Nathan and Chloe were finished in this town. No one was willing to hire Nathan anymore, and no one wanted to do business with them. She had even heard they were considering moving to Chloe's mother's place in Ohio. I told her that might actually be the best outcome. Then Isabella asked me something. She wanted to know how I had known to gather all that evidence before the court hearing. I smiled, remembering the many hours I had spent with Diane preparing for every possible scenario. I explained that after 45 years of dealing with problems, bad weather, crop failures, broken equipment, and financial setbacks, you learn that preparation is everything. You also learn the importance of understanding your enemy. Isabella raised an eyebrow at that word. I told her the truth. Nathan stopped being my son the moment he decided that my money mattered more to him than my well-being. From that moment forward, he was simply another problem that needed to be solved. That evening I received an unexpected visitor. Chloe appeared at my door looking like she had aged 10 years in just a week. She asked if we could talk. I told her she had already said more than enough. She begged for 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, I let her inside. She sat at my kitchen table looking smaller and more defeated than I had ever seen her. She began by claiming that everything had been Nathan's idea. The guardianship petition, the witnesses, the entire plan. She said she had tried to talk him out of it. I pointed out that she still went along with it. Chloe said she had been scared. Nathan owed dangerous people a great deal of money, and those people were threatening him and threatening both of them. She explained that she thought if they could just get enough money to pay off those debts, everything would stop. I told her that thinking it was acceptable to steal from his own mother was not a solution. She stared down at her hands and admitted that she knew how terrible it sounded. She said they had simply been desperate. I told her that desperation does not justify what they had done. She said she understood and insisted she was not trying to justify anything. She said she had come to apologize. I studied her face carefully, trying to see whether there was genuine remorse beneath all the self-pity. Then I asked her a very simple question. What exactly was she apologizing for? Was she apologizing for trying to have me declared mentally incompetent? For breaking into my house? For hiring someone to spy on me? For spreading lies about my mental health? For threatening to have loan sharks hurt me? Or was she simply apologizing because she had been caught? At that point she began crying. Not quiet tears but messy ones that smeared her makeup. She said she was sorry for everything. So I asked her another question. Was she sorry enough to testify against Nathan in his criminal trial? Her tears stopped instantly. She stared at me in shock. I explained that the prosecutor wanted Nathan held accountable. Her testimony about his planning, his threats, and the way he manipulated evidence would be extremely valuable. Chloe said she could not testify against her husband. I asked her why not, especially when he was already willing to let her take the blame for conspiracy charges. Her face turned pale. She asked what I meant. I told her that Nathan's lawyer was arguing that she had been the mastermind behind the entire scheme. According to their defense, she manipulated Nathan into helping her carry out a plan to steal from me. In Nathan's version of events, Chloe was the villain. The look of betrayal that crossed her face was almost satisfying. She insisted Nathan would never do that to her. I reminded her that the same man had already thrown her aside to save himself. He was willing to destroy his own mother over gambling debts, so it should not surprise her if he sacrificed his wife as well. After Chloe left, I sat quietly in my kitchen thinking about family, loyalty, and the price of greed. Nathan had not only destroyed his relationship with me, he had ruined his marriage, his reputation, and possibly his freedom, all for money he had never earned and never deserved. Then the phone rang. It was Diane. She told me she had news about the criminal case. Nathan had been offered a plea deal. I asked what kind of deal it was. 18 months in prison, full repayment of my legal expenses, and a permanent restraining order. Diane explained the details of the plea agreement. Nathan would also have to publicly admit that I had never been mentally incompetent, and that the entire guardianship petition had been fraudulent. If he refused the deal, the case would go to trial, and he could face as much as 10 years in prison if convicted on all the charges. I thought about it for a moment before asking Diane what she recommended. She said I should accept the deal. According to her, it gave me everything I had been fighting for: vindication, compensation for the legal costs, and protection from any future harassment. So I told her to move forward with it. 6 months later, I was sitting on the porch of my new house, a comfortable place on 5 acres just outside town, reading a short article about Nathan's release from county jail. He had served 8 months of his sentence and had been released on parole for good behavior. The newspaper mentioned that he and Chloe had divorced and that he had moved to Ohio to try starting over again. I did not feel any satisfaction in reading about his downfall, but I did not feel regret either. Nathan had made his choices, and now he was living with the consequences. As for me, I had become living proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be a victim. 1 year later, I was hosting Thanksgiving dinner in my new home, for a very different kind of family than the one I had started with. Frank was there, of course. Isabella Navarro joined us with her grandson. Dr. Phillips and his wife came as well. Diane attended, and Detective Langley also joined us after becoming an unexpected friend during everything that had happened. As we cleared the dishes, Isabella looked at me thoughtfully and asked whether I ever regretted how things had turned out with Nathan. It was not the first time someone had asked that question. Friends had asked it. My pastor had asked it. Even the therapist I spoke with briefly while processing the betrayal had asked it. I told Isabella that I regretted the choices Nathan had made. I regretted that he had chosen greed instead of family. I regretted that gambling had destroyed his judgment. And I regretted that he had been willing to hurt his own mother for money. But I did not regret standing up for myself. Not for even a single second. Dr. Phillips gently asked about forgiveness. Some people, he said, believed I had been too harsh. I told him I had forgiven Nathan for being weak, for making terrible decisions, and for disappointing me. But forgiveness does not mean pretending nothing happened, and it does not mean allowing yourself to be hurt again. Detective Langley raised his glass and offered a toast to Eleanor Whitaker, the woman who proved that farm women are far tougher than they appear. Frank immediately agreed and raised his glass as well. Everyone laughed and shared stories around the table. As I looked around, I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. A year earlier, I had been a woman whose own son saw her only as a source of money. Now I was surrounded by people who valued me for who I truly was, not for what I could give them. Most of the money from the farm had been placed into a trust that would eventually support local charities. Part of it went toward creating a scholarship fund for young people who wanted to study agriculture. Another portion helped support programs that assist elderly people dealing with financial abuse from their own families. And I kept enough to live comfortably, enough for my new home, a peaceful retirement, and the occasional trip to places Samuel and I had always dreamed of visiting but could never afford. 3 weeks earlier I had received a letter from Nathan. There was no return address, and the envelope was postmarked somewhere in Ohio. Inside, he had written a short apology and asked if there was any possibility that we might reconcile someday. I spent a long time thinking about that letter before deciding to reply. In my response, I told him that I would always love the little boy who used to bring me dandelions and proudly call them flowers. But that boy had grown into a man who tried to steal from his own mother and destroy her life because of gambling debts. I wrote that I had forgiven him, but I would never trust him again. I told him I hoped he had learned from his mistakes and found a way to live with honesty and integrity. Then I wished him well. When I mailed the letter, I did not include a return address. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt, but that does not mean you cannot build new ones somewhere else. As Thanksgiving dinner came to an end and my guests began preparing to leave, Frank stayed behind for a moment on the porch. He told me something I had not thought about before. According to him, the way I handled the entire situation had helped a lot of people. I asked what he meant. Frank explained that I had shown others that older people do not have to become victims. I had proven that families cannot simply push around their elderly relatives just because they feel entitled to their money. In his opinion, the whole situation had changed how people in town looked at these kinds of conflicts. I looked out across my new property. My small vegetable garden was growing nicely, and the bird feeders were already attracting cardinals and blue jays every morning. I told Frank that I had never intended to change anything. All I had done was refuse to let my son steal from me. Sometimes that is all it takes. After Frank drove away, I stayed on the porch for a while longer, watching the sun sink below the horizon of my new life. It was a life built on my own terms, surrounded by people who respected me, and free from the fear and manipulation that had defined those terrible months with Nathan and Chloe. My phone buzzed with a message from my neighbor's granddaughter. She had recently started visiting me, listening to my stories about farming and about standing up for yourself. In her message, she told me that her boyfriend had been pressuring her to lend him money for a business idea. After hearing what I had gone through, she had refused. He had not been happy about it, but she had stood her ground. She thanked me for showing her that it was okay to protect herself. I smiled and typed back a reply. I told her she had done the right thing and reminded her never to let anyone make her feel guilty for protecting what she had worked for. As the stars slowly appeared above my 5 acres, I reflected on the person I had become through the entire ordeal. Stronger, wiser, and far more careful about who I allowed into my life. Nathan had tried to turn me into a victim. Instead, he had turned me into a survivor. And in the end, that unexpected transformation became a gift I would carry with me for the rest of my life. The farm itself was gone, sold to developers who would soon replace it with suburban houses. But what I had truly built on that land, my strength, my independence, and my refusal to be anyone's victim, would always remain mine. Some inheritances are worth far more than money, and no one, not even family, can take away what truly belongs to you. Thank you for listening. Please remember to subscribe and feel free to share your own story in the comments. Your voice matters.